With the breakdown of the trade talks in Shanghai, whether the two sides will reach an agreement in Washington next month for the 13th round will be a huge given. The deadlock has inflicted casualties on both sides. But politically, China is proving to be more resilient as more grievances are starting to be heard in the U.S. business community about the devastating tariffs. Today, sitting with me in the Beijing studio are Timothy Strafford, chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, and Huang Jing, Dean of the Institute of International and Regional Studies in Beijing Language and Culture University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. First of all, can you tell me quickly, Tim, whether any progress has been made since the breakdown of the trade talks between the two sides in Shanghai?
I think it depends on how you measure progress. I think having the two sides continue to have phone conversations, that shows that both sides are still open to each other and listening to each other. I haven't heard of dates announced yet for the meetings next month. We hope that those will be confirmed. And I think the fact that despite the continued shocks to the negotiation process that we see from additional tariffs and so on, the fact that both sides, the negotiators, are still working very professionally to reach an agreement, that's a kind of a progress and a kind of a good sign.
Well, definition of progress is important, but Professor Huang, simply maintaining contact and staying in touch would be a very important signal indicating that the two sides are serious about the engagement and about reaching a deal. Is that true?
Yes, we all know that end over until it is over. I agree with Tim that since the two still talking to each other, that's a good sign. And also we also see some other sides I think is not bad news in my view. One thing that United States government has decided again to extend for another 90 days for Huawei, a ban on Huawei, and also the announced tariff on 300 billion cargoes. Also looks like delayed a bit, not really put in effect as originally announced. So I think all of this indicates that both sides still have some maneuver rooms on this, which I still give it a chance at this moment.
Secretary Pompeo said on the media that ahead of the 2020 elections, a deal could be reached. But then he said he had not been at the center of the negotiations for a while. So what he said might not be true. What do you think?
I think it's very much in the interest of both countries to have a deal, but I think there are also reasons that they don't want to be the most eager party in the negotiations. And so I think right now each party has reasons to move ahead and reasons to delay. And so they're waiting to see if the other side is ready to move ahead, and they think that might give them some tactical advantage in the negotiation process. I think each side is still feeling out the strengths and weaknesses of the other side's view, and therefore, to be candid, I don't think we're going to actually reach an agreement in September, but I think the two sides will continue to take steps to try to understand the other side better.
But what is the domestic politics for Republicans and Democrats? Do you think President Trump will have to reconsider or realign himself with the different forces so that he will win as much as possible in the trade negotiations?
Well, I'm sure that President Trump is very focused on being reelected as president, so he has to keep his eye on several things. One is, how badly is the U.S. economy impacted by this? How will the stock market react? How will consumers react? How will the economy continue to grow? So he will keep a very close eye on that, and he will try to decide whether, from a political point of view, he can manage any downturns and compensate by saying, but I'm being strong. This is just what he's saying now. He's the chosen one to stand up to China, and even if the economy is bad, this is what the American people are support. So I think he's watching the economy, he's experimenting with different types of political justification for what he's doing, and then he's going to continue to watch what happens to decide how quickly he should move for a deal. And at the same time, President Trump will be looking at China and trying to guess what is in President Xi's mind. How is the Chinese economy being impacted? What are the political forces at work in China? And President Xi will be looking at President Trump and trying to understand what's in President Trump's mind.
In many of his presidential tweets, President Trump seemed to be getting his voters, his electorate prepared for some of the short-term pains, because he said, we're going to harvest long-term benefits. So what did he mean by, getting the electorate ready for something worse?
I think President Donald Trump's dilemma, fundamental dilemma, is that although he knows those who firmly support him will support him whatever, but he also knows that how he appears as a president of the United States, it's another story. He must make sure that not only he has a very firm support from his camp, but also make sure the economy does not look that bad. But that's a problem, because the economy does not lie. No matter how strong he is, how capable he is, he cannot manipulate U.S. economy. So if the trade war continues, if the honest economy indications, I mean the Wall Street, the stock market continues to look bad, I think he will find a way to get himself out of this, because no matter what, he wants to appear strong, but he also appears that he's doing a good job to promoting U.S. economy. That's what he wants.
So the point is that there's no real rush for each side to go to a deal. If you're the Chinese side, you would like to see, well, if the U.S. economy turns down, perhaps President Trump will be more eager to get a deal. And so we should wait to see if that happens before we try to finalize the deal. And on the U.S. side, they may say, well, perhaps the Chinese economy will be negatively affected and China will want to be more eager. So for the time being, they both want to watch the other side and see how the objective conditions of their economies and so on may motivate them to take the next step in the negotiation. So there's no real incentive to try to rush to a deal at this point.
But perhaps it's the performance of the stock markets and the real economy that will be the catalyst for the change of their policy options. For example, The Economist pointed out recently several signals as likely precursors of economic recession in the U.S. For instance, last week markets plummeted when the 10-year Treasury rate dropped below the 2-year for the first time since 2007. Do you think those signals have anything to do with Trump's trade and tax policies? Is that a rebound in response to the president's whims?
Well, I think the president is going to be looking very carefully at the stock market, and he wants to make sure that he can show that his policies are helping to contribute to a strong economy. So I think he's going to keep a close eye on that, and I think if it drops, he'll try to find ways to prop it up, because I mean, his fallback position is to say, well, even though it fell down, this was the right thing for the U.S. president to do. But I think he'd rather be able to run for re-election based on a strong economy and a strong market, rather than having to explain why he had to take other measures.
Another relevant issue concerning the performance of the U.S. economy, Mr. Huang, is Ms. Geeta Gopinath, economist from the IMF, has warned Trump that his trade policies will not work and, in addition, will slow down global growth as it disturbs the rest of the world. What do you make of her remarks?
Almost all the economics experts says that the trade war is bad for U.S. economy. Very few of them say it's good. But here I want to use Bill Clinton's words. Said, Bill Clinton used this to say it's economy stupid. But for Donald Trump's case, I would say it's politics stupid. Just like Tim said, Donald Trump look at this more from a political point of view, and what he really cares about is about his re-election in this. But the two things we can be sure. One thing is that we can be sure is that President Donald Trump is unpredictable. That's quite sure. And he can make a change to surprise everyone. A second thing we're sure is that if we look at the past year or so, whenever we have a bad news about trade deal talk, the stock market. But whenever there is some good news, the stock market will go up. This has already become a quite predictable thing. So in my view, that if in this coming round of talk in September, whichever day it is, if we have a bad news about this talk, that the talk did not go through, we're not going to give have a deal, then I'm pretty sure that the stock market will reflect, will go down. Then that will put certain pressure on Donald Trump, President Trump, of course. But on the other hand, this also could give China a kind of incentive to hang on there, which could turn out to be a miscalculation, because both sides, just like Tim said, both sides want others to blink first. And this is a game of chicken, which is quite negative in the long term for both sides.
A second look at the presidency of Donald Trump, I'm afraid, contrarily, you have a different impression about the trajectory and the path of this unprecedented president in U.S. history, because he tends to use maximum pressure as the tactic, and you can easily figure out what he's going to do next. Well, what do you think of this, counter-argument about his behavior?
Well, I think that that's not the way to build a strong long-term arrangement. I mean, sometimes people get upset and they have a big fight, and then they make up, and then they build their relationship again. I mean, sometimes problems persist and they need to be addressed. But I think, what I'm concerned about is long-term relationship of U.S.-China. And right now, a lot of the assumptions of the relationship have been set aside. And so there's a lot of unpredictability, a lot of distrust. And if we want to build the relationship, we can't go from tweet to tweet and manage a relationship between the two largest economies and the two greatest powers in the world. You have to have certain understandings and rules of the road. And right now, the old ones have basically unraveled, and we need to construct a new global system. And that's not happening at this point. Speaking as a member of the business community, we like certainty and predictability and fairness. And that's the condition under which you decide to make investment decisions, you decide to source products from different locations. And right now, the uncertainty and the fairness have gone away in both sides. I mean, we're not happy with some of the things that the U.S. government is doing in terms of tariffs. We're also not happy with some of the things the Chinese government does in response. We understand that this is going on, but we need to be able to move beyond this. And I think that takes trust. And I don't think maximum pressure is the way that you ultimately develop trust.
But he's the author of Art of the Deal. Earlier, you guys talked about the weakness of the U.S. economy, particularly Professor Huang. It seems President Trump is no longer happy with having a strong dollar. Hence, some suggestions from the international community that it might be time for China and the United States to join hands in intervening with the currency market together. It's what might be called a few years earlier a G2, co-evolution. Instead of carrying on the current economic and geopolitical rivalry, the two giants should join hands. And what do you think of this suggestion that may be very difficult to be accepted by President Trump and his team?
Yes, we know that ever since 2008, we have this, in my view, continuous crisis of credibility of U.S. dollars, which is an international currency. And this, if we have another crisis, financial crisis, 2008, both United States and China stand to lose a lot. So there is, in my view, a kind of demand. I mean, if we look at things objectively, that global financial situation will be stable, and the U.S. dollars as the international currency should stand firm rather than like here, because right now we know this is a problem. But having said that, the problem is that, just like Tim said, we don't have any trust with each other. And I think worse, we know that the old fundamentals for the bilateral relationship between the United States and China is almost gone, it's no longer there. The new fundamental is yet to establish. So the bilateral relationship of the two major biggest powers on earth is in a transitional period. In this transitional period, at least we need some predictability. And it is worse that, okay, let's face it, now United States and China, especially United States, wants to be hostile towards China, but at least make it more predictable. So both sides know that how I can predict your next step so we can prepare for it. But the problem, maybe some people argue, the President Donald Trump's strength is that he's unpredictable, but he's the leader of the largest power on earth. If he's so unpredictable, then the whole world, including China, of course, get lost. We don't know how to deal with him. That's why we create this great uncertainty that nobody knows which is the next step. That's where the problem really is.
Perhaps we are living in the age of great uncertainty. It's not just for domestic politics of the U.S. But you are watching Dialogue with Mr. Timothy Stratford, chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, and Huang Jingdin of the Institute of International and Regional Studies in Beijing Language and Culture University. We're discussing what could happen in early September when the two sides from China and the United States meet to discuss the trade issues. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tim, last week at the Detroit Economic Club, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence linked the China-U.S. trade deal with Hong Kong. Do you think there could be a scenario of putting the problems in Hong Kong into the trade talks?
Well, I don't think that should happen directly. And certainly the U.S. trade negotiators are not dealing with questions of Hong Kong. That's not what their job is in the U.S. government. And I think one of the problems we have with the trade negotiations is if you think of every issue between the U.S. and China, you know, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all the different issues you can think of, and you put those in the trade negotiations, then you'll make it impossible for us to solve all these problems in the foreseeable future. A better approach would be try to solve the economic problems as best as we can, generate something positive and beneficial for both countries through the trade relationship, and then build on that beginning area of trust and goodwill to gradually expand cooperation in other areas. Now, having said that, if there was something very negative that happened in Hong Kong, then this would create a general political environment where it would be hard for the two governments to make a deal. But short of something, you know, truly terrible and horrible happening, it would seem that it would be best to keep these separate.
Professor Huang, do you agree that what happens in Hong Kong will deliver a negative impact on Taiwan and U.S.-China relationship by the end of the day?
I think right now, of course, I cannot say it's a positive. It's obvious negative, and it's also a great challenge to Beijing, but also great opportunities, because I think so far, I think Chinese government has handled the Hong Kong issue quite well, because Beijing has been very wise to step out, not step in. It is demonstrators, whatever they want, the demonstrators versus the Hong Kong government. So therefore, it's an internal affair, not only China, it's an internal affair of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong people. If we have one country and two systems, I think Beijing is wise enough to have confidence in the Hong Kong people. Confidence that they can handle their own issues. In other words, the Hong Kong government, on the one hand, can manage whatever happens on the street. On the other hand, we believe the majority of Hong Kong people want stability, want prosperity. They don't want things like this go on. They have to make sure Hong Kong is part of China. Hong Kong will move forward together with China, even though China may be a little bit faster and so on and so forth. I think the worst scenario, and the scenario would work, for example, Tsai Ing-wen's agenda is that Hong Kong is being departed from China either because of the backwardness or because lack of development and so forth. Hong Kong has to be developing together with mainland China. If that's a major goal, then that's we handle the in my view, it's a little bit.
Of course, Hong Kong will have to prosper as part of the process of getting integrated into the Great Bay Area that boasts of 11 cities connecting Macau, Hong Kong with 9 cities in Guangdong. So, Tim, what are your thoughts on the Shenzhen, example?
Well, I agree that it's a much better approach to hold out a carrot and say, here's what being part of the mainland will offer to you. And not only is this good for Shenzhen, but it's good for Hong Kong. You have to give people hope and something to aspire to. I think the biggest problem is, people in Hong Kong have grown up in a different system, and they look at the world in a different way. I've lived in Hong Kong for 6 years. I know that their educational system and their experiences are different. And right now, because you have a gap between the way people in Hong Kong see things and the way some people in Beijing see things, you need to have a Hong Kong government that understands both systems and that can help explain each system to the other side and serve as a kind of a buffer. And in Hong Kong, people have felt that that the government there is trying to be a representation of Beijing, but they haven't felt that the government has tried to represent their interests and explain Hong Kong to the leaders in Beijing. And I think the Hong Kong government needs to have the confidence of both sides and be an honest broker as we work through the one country, two systems process.
Gentlemen, for years it seems, in my observation, that the U.S.-China relationship has always been held hostage by a third player, like in the case of Japan. And Taiwan could be yet another major obstacle in U.S.-China relationship. Likewise, Do you think the recent sale, the decision by the Pentagon to sell 66 F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan would be yet another indicator that the trade relationship, the trade talks will be held hostage by a third player, something you mentioned earlier? Very bad argument.
In this case, whether they're held hostage or not will really depend on the government of China. If the U.S. makes this sale, then the U.S. will not object, of course, so then it's a matter of whether China will object or not. If China objects, then the trade deals will be delayed, and that would be very unfortunate. But again, you know, we have trade issues, we have national security issues, we have different value systems, we have different political systems, we have lots of different issues between the two countries. And the question is, can we deal with them one by one, or are we going to mix them all together and have to deal with them all at once? If we have to deal with them all at once, it will be far too complicated. We need to start with things where our ability to cooperate is strongest, work that out, build confidence, build relationships, and then gradually expand from there.
Contrarily, Professor Huang, it seems people like John Bolton, Michael Pompeo really want the relationship between Washington and Beijing to be bad, to be, hostile, locked up in animosity, like what happened during the Cold War. Therefore, it's very difficult, and perhaps, forgive me for saying that, Tim might sound a little bit naive politically to talk smart about having a constructive, realistic relationship between the two countries at this moment.
Yeah, I think there is quite fundamental changes in the thinking about, for example, Taiwan issue. Before that, the major policy of the United States for China's engagement. So both sides looks at the importance of stability of the bilateral relationship. So therefore, they don't want Taiwan to be a big issue. But now the situation changed. Like you said, Bolton and the Pompeo, people like them, they say China is an enemy. So if China is an enemy, they try to do everything to get to China. And of course, Taiwan's value, the so-called strategic value for United States increased because now United States, not United States, I mean Trump administration, those people say China is an enemy. So therefore, they actually violate the communique in 1984. We know that the communique in 1984 under President Donald Reagan is that United States will not sell offensive weapons to Taiwan. All the weapons United States sell to Taiwan, number one is to fulfill Americans' commitment to the regional stability and the peace, in which Taiwan is part of it. Number two, that's why the weapons sold to Taiwan should be defensive rather than offensive. But if you look at this sale, F-16 and all of this, it's all offensive. So which, of course, does not sound very well for the Chinese, either government and the people, because for the Chinese, they say they use Taiwan to get to us, which Taiwan is part of China.
Tim,
so that's why the two sides.
Your counter-argument?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Trump administration is quite different from previous administrations in the way it sets policy. There is not a clear, uniform, comprehensive policy on China that we have seen from the administration. We have seen different speakers, and they normally would be very authoritative, but they don't always say the same thing. And even if you do get that from the Trump administration, you have many other people in the United States who have different views. You may have seen a letter in the Washington Post where, you know, some so-called China hands have said China is not our enemy. And they have said, yes, we have very difficult issues to resolve. We need to be very determined in addressing them and protecting our own interests. But that doesn't mean that China is an enemy. And so the reason I'm talking about a way to improve the relationship is that's what we need to do. And if both sides just say, well, the other side has concluded that we're an enemy, therefore we'll just focus on more hostile action, we don't have to go down that path. And the U.S. is not firmly committed to that path. And I don't think that China is firmly committed to that path either. But people, we have to continue to explain the importance of the relationship and to show that, yes, we do need to do some things differently, but that doesn't mean we throw out the whole relationship.
Many heavyweight politicians and even military guys in the Pentagon said over and over, China is not an enemy, China is an adversary and a competitor. And having said this, Mr. Huang, It seems the Pentagon, I mean, the White House has delivered a very conflicting signal about whether it is China who takes the blame for dragging on and on before the 2020 election, because President Trump said in one of his presidential tweets that China really hoped that he could be replaced by a Democrat in the next election so that China could survive the current scathing trade talk. What do you think of his reckoning?
We know that the overall environment is not good. We also know that two sides are not friendly towards each other. And at this moment, if the other side keeps to be so unpredictable, keeps to manage the entire situation just by twist after twist, then what the Chinese government going to do? They have to make sure they prepare for the worst scenario, because you're hostile, number one. Number two, you're unpredictable. Number three, your policy is very ad hoc, change almost every day, every moment. And last but not the least, you try to play every card you can play against me in a kind of very negative way. And Chinese government have no choice but to prepare for the worst scenario, either on situation of Taiwan or with the United States. So if one side keeps changing, and the other side prepare for the worst scenario, I think that's a situation which is not really promising.
You've raised a number of important points on the issue of trust, and that's why Tim said, if you deliver a package of issues, that will make the issue of trade talks very, very difficult. China is accused of postponing the trade talks, but President Trump uses Hong Kong and Taiwan as bargaining chips. That will add to the adversity of the current trade talks. We're going to keep the dialogue open for more of our brainstorming on this most important, the most consequential relationship in the world. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.